Hold on to your cheese sandwiches. You got a bloody roller coaster ahead of you. So this is an important video. One reason, and something I'll mention right off the bat, is Hegel actually sent me this unit for review. I've had it for months, and I got a lot to say here, but Hegel isn't paying or sponsoring the video in any other way. Now, having said that, they know who they're dealing with here. And if you've watched my channel before, you'll know I'm pretty much a Hegel fanboy at this point, and for good reason too. So keep all of that in mind. I'm going to approach this as a person who just recently bought the Hegel H400. I reviewed it and I gave it my gold standard award. It's awesome. Link below if you hadn't seen it. A lot of what I said in that review actually carries over to this one, so keep that in mind and check out that video. Now, admittedly, the H400 release had me a little curious. I mean, I obviously felt a bit of FOMO, I'm not going to lie, but how could they improve on the already amazing H400 that I use and love? You can see from the name, they didn't just tack on a V at the end the way that they did with their recently upgraded H190V. No. This time they added 10 to its number. So in this video, we find out what those 10 extra Hegels gets you. Is it in fact an upgrade, or is this just how the audio component wheel keeps spinning around? Stick around and find out with my story entitled The Legend of 10 Hegels. It's gonna get crazy up in this bit.
Let's start with opening her up and having a quick chat about physical differences between the H400 and H390. Alright, so what exactly hasn't changed from the last generation? The weight and pretty much all dimensions are the same, except the H400 is just a bit taller now. It's still 250 watts per channel into 8 ohms, has dual mono design, sound engine 2, damping factor of 4000, rune ready, the list goes on and on. If you're already familiar with the H390, Hegel didn't exactly reinvent the wheel with this one, which is a good thing. There are differences though, which we're going to chat about.
All right, the remote to the new H400 is very similar to the 390, but there are a couple differences. So as you can see, the font and the printing is a lot brighter on the H400. There's a lot more contrast, which makes it more legible, which is actually kind of nice. The other thing, which is interesting, is it says streaming on the H400, where on the H390 it says computer. So that's interesting. I wonder why they changed that. And other than that, they're the exact same remote, same IR sensor, and it comes with 2 AA batteries as well, just like the last one did. And the cable looks like the same cable. I just thought I'd mention, I put this back into its sleeve. This is my favorite Hegel hack, actually. It's a Nintendo Wii remote cozy that you can get on Amazon really cheap, and it just makes this thing, oh, so great to hold and interact with. And if you drop it, of course, it's protected. But it's more about the handling and then muscle memory. I always know that below this is volume down and covering is volume up. So I'm always able to find that in the dark without seeing the more legible font that is in the new H400. So just thought I'd note that.
So that brighter font on the new remote also carries over to the front of the H400. As you can see, the printing on their logo and below the source and volume knobs is just more bright and noticeable than before.
Okay, that's the H400. That's the H390. As you can see, the top of each unit, there's more vents on the 390, but the venting on the 400 is thicker and not in the middle. All right, turning the Hegels around, looking at their tushies.
It's basically the exact same configuration, same amount of ports, same ports. The only difference, I mean, besides the, plugs I have to take out in order to get speaker cables in, the only difference, as you can see, is it's, again, just a little bit brighter on the H400 than the H390. And in the back here, I think it's a welcome change because, sometimes it's hard enough to read back there as it is in certain conditions. Yeah, I think that's a win for the H400. Other than that, I mean, that's all for the physical differences. The biggest difference, in my opinion, is this layout of the vents. I'm assuming there's more heat coming out on either side than it is on the middle, and that's why that they did this. But I mean, I actually like being able to see that big toroidal transformer out of the grills. But I'm sure they have their reasons, and I mean, there's no deal breaker there. But yeah, pretty much the same thing from the rear end.
All right, let's talk software, because now with modern Hegels, including the H400, you get access to their new control app. It's not meant to compete with uber high-end software like Rune per se, but it's really nice to have and add some creature comforts. You actually get quite a bit more functionality than before too. First off, you get on-screen access to Spotify, Google Cast, and AirPlay, as well as podcasts and radio. So I briefly checked out an 80 station, listened to some Blondie and Stevie Wonder in 48 kilohertz, and it was fine. Now, it's only MP3 quality, mind you, but there's lots to choose from, and it's all completely free to listen to, so that's a bonus. Okay, so how many times have you sat down all exhausted and lazy, only to realize that your remote is missing, hidden, or just out of reach? This is me all the time with my little Apple TV remote. You see, I mention Apple because they have the remote baked into the iPhone and iPad software. At the bare minimum, I always have my phone on me, and that's my alternate remote. This is really handy because it enables my laziness in such a great and meaningful way. So on that same vein, now you can access your Hegel battle station from that same phone or tablet. I can't tell you how many times this has come in handy. One thing I really appreciate about the Hegel control app is the ability to change to a specific input rather than the regular way of cycling through each input one at a time with their physical remote. Do it too fast and potentially miss that input, only to have to go ahead and cycle through them again. This is a little thing, but if you're like me and switch inputs a lot, it actually makes a nice difference. It's really great to be able to just pick the input you want right off the bat. Easy. So one minor nitpick that I have, and something that I think should get some love in the future, are small incremental volume changes. I'll explain. You see, volume control in the app is done with a slider on your touchscreen. You just slide your finger slowly and very carefully, and you've got proper volume control. If that finger should slip on the slider, your 250 watt per channel beast of an amp could potentially get really loud really fast. So perhaps in a future software upgrade, Hegel could implement volume buttons to work in a one numerical value at a time, behaving, the same way as it does in the physical remote itself. This would be really good. While I'm on the remote, this is something that I'm really glad Hegel has not fundamentally changed. It feels just right, and the audible click when pressing a button makes it a total pleasure to use compared to most remote controls. When I was a kid, our remote controls clicked similarly, and so we called it the clicker. That's a little personal history lesson. I'm sure you guys needed to. In today's time where everyone is going for touchscreens and capacitive buttons, good on Hegel for keeping the old school clicker experience. I wish all of my remotes could be like this. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the app for all of the reasons above, but in the end, I like having a blend of these lazy digital features without losing those sweet analog ones that we're already accustomed to. Hegel taps into this almost perfectly, and well done, guys. Now, I know some of you guys may be curious if the control app functionality is coming to your older model Hegels via something like a firmware update down the road. And unfortunately, no, that's not the case. The reason being is these older model streaming boards, they don't have the memory to support the app. So, sorry guys. And now on to the main event, which I feel are the internal differences. So, we've got a new streaming board, a new DAC based on the one that they put in the H600, slight preamp upgrades, and finally, the mains input is now improved and more silent. So what do these upgrades amount to? There's no way that they could be quantified by words on a press release, a spec sheet, or comparison chart. Hegel is actually pretty tight-lipped on specifics about their internals, but don't worry, I did some digging here, and more on that in a bit. The differences here are really the type of thing that you can only understand from proper A-B comparisons. So I've been A-Bing for the past few months, and there are differences, which we'll get into now. The too long didn't watch version is, in most cases, it's an improvement over the H390.
Once the H400 was fully broken in, I played the 30th using its internal DAC and streamer. It was really impressive, and I felt things. I know Hegel's using a Sabre DAC chip from ESS Technologies this time around. They used AKM previously, which, as far as DS chip DACs go, are normally my preference. Maybe that preference is changing, or perhaps they just implemented these Sabre chips really, really well. I'm not hearing that uncomfortable shrillness in the highs that I have in the past with other Sabre chip DACs. It's definitely an improvement. So I inadvertently got into Hiromi Hosono recently, and I listened to his 1978 album Cochin Moon using the internal DAC of the H400. So at no point did I feel sound quality was lacking at all. I mean, I was totally tripped out. This is the type of music that makes you question your sobriety, and the DAC really didn't disappoint. I feel like my system being fed entirely from the H400 is really high-end and could easily be described as endgame. That is, if you're the type to just want one box connected to your speakers. As you can see, I built a shelf from leftover parts that I didn't use in my office rig. So this made it much easier to get to the back of both machines for A-B comparisons, which we'll get into right now. Rune picked this track by Hideaway, and I found it pretty great, so this was the first one I tested.
This was supposed to be the part of this video where I tell you I didn't hear much of a difference at all. But that's not the case. I went back and forth on that same track and preferred the H400.
So both machines did sound really good, but the H400 rendered things a bit cleaner while maintaining a slightly blacker background. This sort of threw me for a loop because I expected little to no difference between Hegel's in this scenario. This has also remained consistent in pretty much everything I tested thereafter.
It's a small difference, but it's there and it's an upgrade. Now, this is just testing out the amp and preamp using my Lumen U2 Mini streamer and Denafrips Vitas 2 for digital. I wanted to start off with how I normally listen and see if I could hear a difference. And I did. Does it make me want to listen to the H400 instead of the H390 in this regard? Yes, actually, but it's not as big of a jump in sound quality like it is, say, from the H190 to the H390.
Since it was newly remastered, I checked out Psycho Killer. Qu'est-ce que c'est? I immediately noticed more definition and punch when played through the H400. When I switched back to the H390, it definitely sounded more polite. Drum hits didn't stand out as much. It sounded good and very enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but somehow just not as clean, well-defined, and punchy as when played through the H400. I repeated that same test again because I had doubts. So right from the beginning baseline, it's just apparent. The H400 just sounds punchier in my main system. I continued A-Bing, and there's no question. The updated internal DAC is performing at a much higher level than the last generation. Now, this could also be attributed to the updated streamer, quieter power, and upgraded preamp, but there's just no doubting that this is an upgrade. That bump in resolution and overall punchiness can also work against us. In tracks that aren't as well recorded like Thoughts, the politeness actually works to my H390's benefit. If you're a weirdo like me and just start binging Frankie Valli, the H390 was my preference between the two. They're both so bloody good though, and get even better with certain external DACs.
We haven't really talked about the improvements to the mains input now being more silent. What could I say about this? Quite a bit actually, and this is where things get interesting. So I brought up the Hegel H400 here to my office setup, and I swapped out my H190 to see how it fared with my KEF R3 Metas. They do go really well with this amp, but here's the thing. You see, I normally have my H190 plugged into an Audiolab DC block. I made a video on this if you're interested as to why. Most of you probably aren't. It wasn't a very popular video, but the too long didn't watch is I have sporadic DC on my power lines. This causes buzzing in both my Hegel amps, and it seems to be a really common problem that was fixed with these third-party DC blockers that I had to buy separately. So this specific model DC blocker that I have up here in my office won't actually support the wattage going to the H400. So to be safe, I had to plug its mains cable directly into the wall, forgoing the DC protection that I have up here in my office. Better, quieter power is great, but I expected that buzzing from those beefy toroidal transformers to happen eventually. So I paused the music after about an hour and I put my ear right up to the amp and I heard nothing. No hum, no buzz, silence.
I hear nothing.
Cool. But remember that this problem is intermittent for me, so I decided to just leave the H400 plugged into this setup and I used it for an entire month. It was the same thing. Every single time I put my ear up to the beast and I did check sporadically, it was just dead silent as if it were turned off. This wasn't at all what I was used to. So I emailed Anders, who's my contact at Hegel, and asked him what is actually going on here specifically. So he replied with, there is indeed a custom DC blocker built right into the H400, now along with a few other little tweaks. He didn't mention what those little tweaks were specifically. Hegel likes to keep their cards close to their chest, but in my opinion, this is a huge thing that should be mentioned and a very notable upgrade over their last generation.
So remember earlier while comparing just the amps and preamps using external equipment, I noticed a blacker background with the H400. This has got to be one of the reasons why, right? I mean, you put your ear right up to the thing and it's audibly dead inside.
This is next level stuff. Clean power in hi-fi is kind of a big deal and could account for a nice chunk of the improvements that I've been hearing. I've personally spent a small fortune on DC blockers and now you just don't have to. So far, this is only done in the new H400 and I found out also the H600. But I hope this gets implemented in the rest of their lineup down the road. So this is the part of the video where we talk about whether or not you should upgrade to the H400, assuming you have the older model. This depends. If you're on an older, lower powered Hegel like the H95, H120, or the 190, this would be a pretty huge jump in features, usability, but most importantly, sound quality. If you've already got an H390 like me, you could go either way and be totally good with that choice. My review of the H390 hasn't changed. It's an amazing bit of kit that doesn't fall by the wayside just because Hegel one-upped it with this new model. If you're in this for an all-in-one and don't intend on ever using an external DAC, you'll be getting noticeable improvements with the H400. On the other hand, even if you're already using a good external DAC, there's still improvements to sound quality. Well, not as much of a difference, it's still there, and incredibly tempting to me. Plus, you get the upgraded usability of Hegel's control app and the benefit of upgraded power handling with what we now know includes that custom built-in DC blocker. For me personally, that's huge. Now, I'm hardly in the position to spend your hard-earned cash, but as cliche as it may sound, you can't go wrong either way. You're picking between two Ferraris, and these are honestly great choices to obsess over. Enjoy yourselves. You know, going into this review, I have to admit that the H400 upgrades, on paper at least, felt marginal at first. It's not like Hegel completely redesigned from the ground up, or gave us something gimmicky like Dolby Atmos support, or even raised the wattage. No, what they did do though was take an already great product and just build on it. The H400 is very much an evolution. A lot of thought was put into making a good thing even better. It's more feature-rich, higher quality power, and better sound. This amounts to a worthy upgrade in my books. If you're looking to buy your first Hegel integrated amp, this should definitely be on your shortlist. Try and demo one and you'll see what I'm talking about. So to answer my question from the beginning of this video, no, they didn't just tack on an extra 10 Hegels and call it a day. They made what I feel is an excellent improvement and strong step forward without taking anything I liked away from the last generation. So all of those improvements while maintaining those good understated looks. Dual mono design, damping factor of over 4,000, you know, everything that makes this a serious contender. So you know what? The H400 is the new sweet spot in Hegel's lineup and gets my gold standard award. I'd like to thank Hegel for sending me out this monster and all of you guys for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and enjoy your music, and I'll see you soon.